Today I'm bringing you another episode in the Paper Bead Glazing series. We're going to glaze a paper bead with clear embossing powder, but then we're going to push the boundaries, and I'm going to show you how to give your paper beads a texture so that they look like stone or metal. It's beautiful. You're going to love it. Embossing powder is a seriously cool substance that is used a lot in stamping and card making projects. When heat is applied to the powder, it melts onto the paper and creates a hard, raised surface like this one. You can get embossing powder in all kinds of colors and mixes, including clear, which works great for glazing paper beads. In this video, we're going to glaze a paper bead with clear embossing powder, and at the end of the video series, it will go head-to-head against the other glazing methods I've used to see how they're all performing in comparison to each other. Before we get started, if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button below this video so you can see all of the paper beading tutorials that are coming up. I'd love to have you join the channel. Here's what you'll need to glaze with embossing powder. Unlike the glazing methods I've shown you in this series so far, you are going to need to spend a bit of money on a tool for this method. You'll need a heat gun. I'm using a Wagner Heat Gun, which I purchased from Amazon for around $30. I've linked it in the description below so it's easy for you to find. You might be wondering if you can use a hairdryer. Well, I understand why you're thinking that, but no, you cannot use a hairdryer. The hairdryer will blow your embossing powder all over your house. You will also need embossing ink. I'm using the Versamark brand. Embossing ink has a slow drying time so that you have time to put the powder on it. You can use other types of ink as long as they have a longer drying time. No surprise that you need wood skewers, as we've used those for every glaze we've tried so far. However, for this one, make sure you have a long skewer, not a toothpick size. The heat gun is very hot and you don't want your fingers anywhere near it. I have heard people say that they use metal knitting needles for this, although I'm thinking that the metal might get pretty hot. And the last thing is a piece of paper to put under your work to catch the embossing powder that you shake onto the bead. You'll use this paper to pour the extra powder back into the jar so you don't waste it. And of course, you need a clear jar of embossing powder. You can get embossing powder at your local craft store or on Amazon. The brand I use the most is Wow Embossing Powder. This is a company out of England, but they also have shipping from their US warehouse. Let's glaze. The first step in this process is to cover the bead in embossing ink. I dip the bead onto the pad where the holes are to get them well covered. Then I put the bead on the skewer and roll it around on the pad until I'm sure it's completely covered. Do you see how the ink is darkening my paper? Now that did not happen with the brush-on glazes we've used so far. The light spot here is where glue got on the surface of the bead. If I were making this bead for an actual project, I would do one of two things. Either rub glue over the entire bead to seal it off, and then the ink won't soak into the paper and darken it. Or I'd have a little fun with this and randomly streak glue around the bead to give it a variegated look. Since this bead isn't for a project, but it's going to be compared to the other glazing methods at the end of this paper bead glazing series, I'm going to leave it like this. Hold the bead over the paper, or you can use the lid of the embossing jar, and lightly shake the embossing powder onto it. Now make sure that you cover the entire bead. If you've missed any spots with the ink, you're going to see it right here. Once the bead is fully covered, tap it off on the edge of your embossing jar to knock off any excess powder. If you skip this step, that powder is going to go flying as soon as your heat gun hits it. So if you want it back in the jar instead of all over your house, don't forget to tap. It's time for the heat gun. Now the gun's kind of loud, but I'm going to black out the sound so I can talk to you while I'm using it. Turn the gun on and let it heat up for just a few seconds. Then point it at the bead. Turn the bead as you go. If you leave the heat gun in one place too long, it'll start to bubble and burn the embossing powder. It takes a little bit of practice, but you'll develop a feel for how far to hold the gun away from the bead. Once all of the embossing powder is melted, turn off the gun. Now the powder will stay sticky for a minute or so. Don't touch it because you will mar the surface. If you're planning to do additional coats, you can shake more powder onto the surface while it's still sticky. Again, make sure you get the bead completely covered. Turn on the gun and heat your bead again. Remember that the first layer of glaze is still warm, so you won't have to hold the gun on as long this time. Be careful not to burn the glaze. So this is how it looks with 2 coats. Now, I feel like the embossing powder isn't covering the sides of my bead well enough. The edges just don't look shiny, so I'm going to do a 3rd coat. In my other videos, I put on 4 coats of the brush-on glazes. Now, I'm not going to put 4 coats on this because I have tried it in the past and the glaze ended up breaking off of the bead after a while. I have a theory it's because the coating was too stiff and couldn't shift or expand with the paper. So we'll stop with 3 coats and we'll see how it holds up when I put all of these glaze products to the test in the final episode of this series. But we're not done yet, because embossing powder doesn't just come in clear. It comes in all kinds of different colors and textures. Now I'm going to show you how you can use embossing powder to make your paper beads look like metal or stone. The process for the colored embossing powders is exactly the same as with the clear, so I'm going to skip that part and just show you the fun part, applying the heat. First, we'll use the Wow Metallic Platinum. Now this is going to give our bead a nice metal look. Ah, that is gorgeous, just like metal. Now we're going to use the Wow Color Blend Verdigris. See how it makes the bead look a little bit like a stone? It also has a great rough texture. Now this is an embossing powder I just recently found. It's called Violet Pearl, and it looks a little different depending on what color is underneath. I'm going to apply this embossing powder to this black and white bead. It looks just like the clear powder looked, but watch what happens when we add the heat. The white stripes turn to a pearl look, and the black background turns to a dark purple sheen. How cool is that? Here's a better look. There are several different shades of this pearl powder available on Amazon, and I've linked them below. The next embossing powder is the Wow Metaline First Frost. Look at that beautiful light blue color. And the texture reminds me of actual frost that you sometimes see on the grass in the morning. This embossing powder is from Moxie and it is called Glitter Silver. So it's got a little glitter in the mix to give the finished product more sparkle than the metallic powders alone. Oh, and one tip I didn't mention earlier, I use the paper we put down to funnel the embossing powder back into the jar. That way, I don't waste any of it. The red Glitz from Wow is our next embossing powder. It gives a true rich red finish that glitters. Just gorgeous. Here's a final look at all of the beads we've done today. Just amazing, isn't it? Embossing powder really adds something special to paper beads. If you want to learn more about making paper beads and paper bead jewelry, please subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know that you're interested in this craft. And if there are any specific subjects you'd like to see a tutorial on, please leave them for me in the comments. Watch for the next episode in this series on paper bead glazing, where we'll test out more products and methods of glazing, and then the final episode where we'll put them all head to head and see how they hold up. See you next time.